What does it take for a film to disappear completely? Not because it was too violent, not because it was too obscene, but because it dared to tell the truth. A truth too raw, too subversive, or too damning for those in power to tolerate. Hollywood has always been a master of illusion, crafting dreams, selling fantasies, editing reality. But beneath the glittering facade, there's a hidden real, spliced together with censorship, fear, and control. Throughout the 20th century, certain films vanished not by accident or neglect, but by design. They were suppressed, blacklisted, hunted down, and buried, not for what they showed, but for what they exposed. These weren't just provocative films, they were cinematic acts of rebellion. They questioned governments, unmasked religious dogma, exposed studio abuses, and challenged the very fabric of American ideals. And for that, they paid the price. Some were banned outright, others had their negatives destroyed. A few managed to survive, smuggled out on low-grade reels, passed hand-to-hand like contraband, whispering their warnings from the shadows. Even today, many of these films remain ghosts absent from official archives, ignored by streaming platforms, and rarely acknowledged in film schools. The directors behind them, blacklisted, surveilled, or worse, forgotten. So tonight, we project their memory back into the light. This is not just a countdown of lost cinema. It's a dossier of defiance, a reel of resistance. These are the 15 films Hollywood tried to erase not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well in revealing something dangerous. Which ones still hold power? Which ones were unjustly silenced? And which ones were never meant for us to see? Let's begin. 1. The Battle of Algiers. La Battaglia di Algeri, 1966. The film that military academies study and governments tried to erase. Directed by Gillo Pontecorvo, The Battle of Algiers was a raw, neo-realist depiction of the Algerian struggle against French colonial rule. Shot in black and white, with non-actors and documentary techniques, it felt terrifyingly real. Too real. France banned it until 1971. In the US, it was pulled from cinemas during times of racial unrest. The Pentagon banned screenings on military bases. Even in Algeria, the film was suppressed during civil conflict for fear it might reignite resistance. And yet, the CIA studied it, the Department of Defense screened it after 9/11. Revolutionaries carried bootleg copies. The Battle of Algiers remains the most dangerous film about uprising ever made. Can a film become a weapon? 2. Ecstasy. Extase. 1933. A single scene of nudity, a tidal wave of condemnation. Before the Hays Code tightened Hollywood's moral noose, Ecstasy dared to show something rare. Female desire. Hedy Lamarr, then 18, appeared nude in a skinny-dipping scene, and later in a wordless, sensual sequence, experienced what critics interpreted as an on-screen orgasm. It shocked the world. The Vatican condemned it, Germany banned it, the U.S. Customs Office blocked its import. Hedy Lamarr was ostracized and fled to America, where she reinvented herself as a star, but Ecstasy was never acknowledged in her Hollywood career. The film itself was almost lost, buried by time and censure. Restorations only surfaced in the 1992nd. Was it obscenity or liberation ahead of its era? 3. Mondo Cane, 1962. The film that invented shockumentary and nearly got outlawed worldwide. Mondo Cane was presented as a travel documentary, but what it delivered was a disjointed, sensational montage of global rituals, violence, and cultural taboos from pig slaughter in New Guinea to simulated funerals in Asia. It was voyeuristic. It was judgmental, and it was unlike anything cinema had ever seen. Audiences were horrified. Censors were outraged. In Australia, the film was banned for offending decency. In the US, it faced religious protests and court challenges. France refused distribution for years, and even Italy, its country of origin, debated pulling its release after public backlash. But beneath the grotesque surface lay a critique that the West, in watching, was just as savage. The film held up a mirror and no one liked what they saw. Is documenting darkness the same as exploiting it? 4. Africa Addio, 1966. A travelogue turned nightmare, and then a scandal. Made by Italian directors Gualtiero Jacopetti and Franco Prosperi, Africa Addio set out to document decolonization across Africa. What emerged was a lurid, brutal, and deeply controversial film. Executions, massacres, and civil wars were captured on film, often with little context and some critics claimed certain scenes were staged or provoked. The film was banned in Tanzania, Kenya, and several other African nations. France restricted it. The US heavily edited its release, with critics calling it fascist pornography. Accusations of racism, colonial nostalgia, and voyeurism swirled for decades. In Germany, screenings required police protection, and yet no one could deny its haunting power. Was it exploitation, or just too uncomfortably real? How do we judge truth when it's soaked in blood? 5. Triumph of the Will. Triumphed as Villains, 1935. Sometimes, the most dangerous films aren't lies, they're perfectly shot half-truths. Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will is arguably the most infamous propaganda film ever made. A cinematic monument to the 1934 Nazi Party Congress, it framed Adolf Hitler as a savior, the masses as willing, and the future as glorious. The choreography of crowds, the sweeping aerials, the precision it redefined, documentary filmmaking. But it was also pure fascist myth-making. After World War II, the film was banned in Germany, then heavily restricted in many countries. In the US, screenings were rare, often protested, and in some states, outright prohibited under anti-Nazi legislation. Today, it's studied in film schools with strict academic framing, a cautionary tale of aesthetic power used for moral ruin. Is it art or evidence? 6. The House is Black. Kanesaya asked, 1963. A film so poetic, Iran tried to forget it ever existed. Directed by Foru Farrokhzad, Iran's most revolutionary female poet, The House is Black, is a 22-minute documentary about a leper colony, shot with tenderness, terror, and unbearable humanity. It offered no moralizing, no political slogans, only the disfigured truth, quietly observed. But in 1960 seconds Iran, under the Shah's Western-backed regime, the film was deemed unacceptable. It highlighted suffering the government wanted hidden. It portrayed the lepers not as symbols, but as people. It showed Islam and illness side by side, not as condemnation, but as contradiction. The film was banned from state theaters. Farrokhzad herself was blacklisted from making another film. She died in a car crash just 4 years later, at age 32. Some whispered it wasn't an accident. The film barely survived, passed on old reels among artists and students, studied in secret. Can a whisper be more dangerous than a scream? 7. Man of Marble, Człowiek z marmuru, 1977. The film that almost brought down the Polish Ministry of Culture. Directed by Andrzej Wajda, Man of Marble was a bold, quasi-documentary dissection of Stalinist propaganda in post-war Poland. It follows a young filmmaker uncovering the rise and fall of a once glorified bricklayer, once a national hero, later erased from history. The Polish government delayed the film's release for years, terrified of its implications. It portrayed state corruption, falsified history, and the disillusionment of an entire generation. When it finally premiered in 1977, it was immediately banned from export. In the USSR, it was deemed ideologically toxic. Western studios were warned against distributing it, yet it won the Fipresci Prize at Cannes, and it inspired a sequel, Man of Iron, that helped galvanize the solidarity movement. When cinema questions the mythology of power, it doesn't just get censored, it gets feared. 8. The Green Berets, 1968. Not every banned film is anti-war. Some are banned because they glorify it. John Wayne's The Green Berets was America's first major pro-Vietnam War movie. Released at the height of public protest, it painted a heroic, clear-cut image of American intervention where the Viet Cong were evil and U.S. troops noble liberators. The film enraged critics and anti-war activists, but the backlash went further. In several European countries, including Sweden and Finland, the movie was banned for promoting what they saw as propaganda and militaristic imperialism. University protests erupted where it screened. France limited its release entirely. Despite being endorsed by the Pentagon, the film became a lightning rod for censorship abroad. Some theaters in the US even refused to show it due to fear of violent demonstrations. Can propaganda be banned, even when it reflects state power? 9. Fahrenheit 451, 1966, a film about burning books that almost got burned itself. Francois Truffaut's adaptation of Ray Bradbury's dystopian novel seemed straightforward, a future where firemen ignite instead of extinguish, where knowledge is illegal and books are public enemy number one. But in the context of the Cold War and in the UK, Where the film was produced, it read like a mirror aimed at both East and West. The film's eerie calm, the antiseptic visuals, and the portrayal of a society pacified by mass media struck a nerve. While not formally banned, Fahrenheit 451 faced intense backlash in several countries. In apartheid-era South Africa, it was deemed subversive and never screened. In Eastern Europe, it was quietly blacklisted for its parallels to state censorship. In the US, it received limited release and no studio support. What terrified governments wasn't the fire, it was the silence. Was Truffaut warning us about authoritarianism, or just documenting it early? 10. If 1968, a British boarding school, a revolution in the halls, and a film that predicted Columbine decades before it happened. Directed by Lindsay Anderson, If follows a group of students who rebel against the authoritarian, classist hierarchy of their elite school. As their disillusionment deepens, fantasy and reality blur until the climax explodes in armed insurrection. Released during a time of global student protests, the film was instantly polarizing. British censors hesitated, American distributors balked, some theaters refused to show it. In South Africa, it was outright banned. The film's closing sequence, rifles blazing from rooftops, was shocking then. It's even more disturbing now. Critics debated whether it was satire or incitement. Schools banned discussions of it. The film was quietly sidelined for years, and yet it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Was it an allegory or a prophecy? 11. Zabriskie Point, 1970. How do you bury a film directed by a legend? Michelangelo Antonioni, fresh off Blow Up, was invited by MGM to make a film about America. What he delivered was Zabriskie Point, a psychedelic, slow-burning, anti-establishment odyssey that eviscerated capitalism, police violence, and consumerist fantasies. Its famous final scene, a slow-motion explosion of a suburban house set to Pink Floyd, was widely interpreted as a symbolic annihilation of American values. The FBI reportedly monitored its production. Studio executives, horrified, tried to bury the film on release. It was pulled from theaters after bombing at the box office, and MGM buried it for decades. But bootleg copies thrived. The soundtrack became a cult artifact, and Antonioni's hallucinatory lens on American decline gained prophetic weight over time. Was it a misfire or a warning no one wanted to hear? 12. The War Game, 1966. This film won an Oscar and was still banned by its own country. Commissioned by the BBC, The War Game was intended as a television drama to educate the British public on the potential aftermath of a nuclear attack. What director Peter Watkins delivered, however, was a brutal, documentary-style vision of mass death, martial law, radiation sickness, and the slow unraveling of society. There were no heroes, no hopeful endings, only silence, ash, and bureaucratic collapse. It was too real. The BBC immediately shelved the film, claiming it was too horrifying for public broadcast. But behind closed doors, government documents revealed deeper fears that the film might stoke anti-nuclear sentiment and public distrust in the state's civil defense. The War Game didn't air on British television for over 20 years. Ironically, it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1967. Can a film be too truthful to show, even when it's officially honored? Shisen, Punishment Park, 1971. What if the government created a secret desert camp to deal with dissenters and called it Justice? Punishment Park was Peter Watkins' most scathing political film. Framed as a mockumentary, it follows political activists, students, pacifists, draft dodgers, put on trial and given a choice: serve long prison sentences or endure 3 days in Punishment Park, where armed police hunt them like prey. Released during the height of Vietnam-era unrest, the film struck too close to home. It was immediately labeled anti-American, and many theaters outright refused to screen it. Major studios blackballed Watkins. Critics dismissed it as anarchist propaganda. The BBC disowned him. Today, Punishment Park is studied for its brutal prescience, a film that foresaw the weaponization of fear and the surveillance state. But in 1971, it was buried under silence. Was it too radical for its time, or too accurate? 14. Ilsa, Harem Keeper of the Oil Sheiks, 1976. This film didn't vanish because of what it showed, but because of where it dared to go. Part of the infamous Ilsa exploitation series, this sequel went beyond the grotesque camp of its predecessor. It dove headfirst into the politics of oil, power, and gender domination in the Middle East, thinly veiled critiques of American alliances with brutal regime. The sexual violence was enough to earn bans in dozens of countries. But what truly doomed Ilsa, Harem Keeper, was its timing. Released amid the oil crisis of the 1970 seconds, the film's portrayal of Western complicity in authoritarian excesses was considered far more dangerous than its softcore theatrics. Most prints were seized, TV and cable refused to acknowledge its existence. Even among exploitation fans, the film became a ghost, referenced in whispers, almost never seen in its uncut form. Was it trash or truth wrapped in sleaze? 15. Salt of the Earth, 1954. It's the only American film officially blacklisted by the U.S. government. Directed by Herbert J. Biberman, one of the infamous Hollywood 10 Salt of the Earth was a powder keg wrapped in celluloid. Funded and produced independently after Biberman's imprisonment for alleged communist ties, the film depicted a real-life New Mexico miners' strike, focusing not on union bosses or heroized men, but on the marginalized Mexican-American workers and the women who led their movement. In 1954, that was unthinkable. The film was labeled subversive, un-American. The FBI monitored the production. Projectionists were threatened. Theaters were warned. Even the film's lead actress, Rosaura Revueltas, was deported mid-shoot. Salt of the Earth was effectively banned across the United States. Only a handful of secret screenings kept its legacy alive. No major studio dared touch it. And yet, decades later, the Library of Congress would call it culturally and historically significant. Was it propaganda? Or simply a truth America wasn't ready to see? Bonus fact: Gone to Earth, 1950. A film so visually lush, it was mutilated into silence. Directed by Powell and Pressburger, the British duo behind classics like The Red Shoes and Black Narcissus Gone to Earth told the story of a wild-hearted woman caught between love, superstition, and rural patriarchy in Shropshire, England. But when the film was released in the US, it met its executioner, David O. Selznick. The American producer, unsatisfied with the film's tone and symbolism, re-edited, reshot, and redubbed over 30 minutes, releasing it under a new title, The Wild Heart. His version flopped. The original was buried. Powell and Pressburger disowned the American cut. For decades, Gone to Earth remained a fractured work lost in the tension between artistic vision and commercial control. The original negative was thought gone until a full restoration emerged in 1985. It wasn't banned by government. It was silenced by ego, and in some ways, that's more chilling. These films weren't just banned, they were erased methodically, strategically, sometimes violent, not because they were failures, but because they succeeded in showing something the world wasn't ready to face. They exposed the machinery behind the curtain, the fear beneath the flag, the fragility of empire, ideology, and myth. And yet, despite suppression, despite censorship, they survived in bootlegs, in whispers, in memories passed from artist to artist, dissident to dissident. Some resurfaced decades later, others remain buried, half lost to time. But now you've seen them, you know their names. So the question becomes, which of these films deserved to vanish and which were silenced unjustly? Were they dangerous or just too honest? We want to hear from you. Which of these banned films shocked you the most? Which ones do you think the world still isn't ready for? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe cinema should never be censored, not even when it's uncomfortable, then subscribe to Darkroom Cinema, where we bring the buried reels back to light.